When you watch modern true crime documentaries, you immediately recognize this cinematic aesthetic. It is a gritty, heavily textured evidence board that feels entirely lived in, physical, and authentic. You do not need a massive desktop rig or complex editing software to build this environment. You can design it completely on your iPad. We are going to walk through the complete process, turning pristine files into aged maps, adding realistic physical folds to paper, and heavily distressing typography, sealing it all under film damage. Step 1 is setting up a cinematic canvas. Create a widescreen 4K document, 3840 by 2160 pixels, and immediately organize your layers into dedicated folders for textures, paper overlays, and lighting. Establishing this strict, high-resolution foundation early ensures your final composition stays sharp, and your heavy, overlapping textures won't turn into a muddy mess as the file grows. Our scene begins with a geographical base. Import a high-resolution antique map. To soften its digital crispness, desaturate the image, apply a warm sepia tone, and drop the contrast. Next, change the blend mode so the map melts into a dark charcoal background layer. Now let's create a physical document. Draw a new rectangle on top, filling it with a warm, off-white tone. Pure white rarely works for vintage elements. To make this flat shape feel physical, draw a thin, dark streak down the center and place a bright highlight streak right next to it. This adjacent contrast tricks the eye into perceiving a raised ridge. Apply a slight Gaussian blur to soften the edges, turning those sharp digital strokes into a natural crease catching the light. Grab a textured eraser tool to chew up the crisp borders, then take a soft, dark brush and paint subtle burn marks along the outside edges. By systematically forcing this physical damage and introducing dimensional folds, a lifeless digital rectangle becomes a believable, tactile object you can almost touch. Drop in a historical newspaper clipping, focusing on heavy, bold serif typography to establish the narrative. If you were to type this out yourself, crisp vector letters would instantly break the illusion of age. Duplicate your text layer, apply a small blur, and lower the opacity to simulate how wet ink naturally absorbs into the fibers of cheap paper. To push this further into a true crime aesthetic, aggressively increase the contrast and overlay subtle vertical scanner streaks to mimic a degraded archival photocopy. Printed evidence is only half the story. We need to introduce the human hand at work to show active investigation. Select a rough, dry ink brush and draw hasty, imperfect red circles around key geographic locations and newspaper headlines. Stamp coordinating text using an old mechanical typewriter font and draw raw route arrows connecting the scattered pieces of evidence across the board. These hasty, unpolished markings give the board a sense of urgency. The viewer feels like they are looking at a case being actively pieced together in real time. To keep the viewer focused on the evidence, we need to artificially restrict their vision with a dark vignette. Create a new layer on top, fill it with black, carve out a heavily feathered selection in the center, hit delete, and lower the opacity. With the edges darkened, switch your brush to a soft airbrush and paint a few warm-toned streaks of fog across the center. We wrap the entire composition in the imperfections of an analog film strip. Fill a layer with medium gray, apply heavy noise, and set it to the overlay blend mode. This specific mathematical blend forces the grain into both the shadows and the highlights at the same time. Take a splatter brush and scatter a few irregular specks around the corners to emulate physical dust and microscopic scratches trapped in the projector gate. Keep the opacity on these scratches extremely low. If they are too obvious, the graphic will look like you applied a cheap digital filter. Pressing all these disjointed layers beneath a unified light source and organic, breathing grain officially transforms our digital collage into a single, cohesive cinematic frame. Notice how the careful combination of directional lighting and dense grain ties every individual piece of evidence together. The illusion works strictly because of the flaws we introduced. The burnt edges, the ink bleeds, and the uneven typography prove that the object has a physical history. To preserve this level of detail for video production, you must export your canvas correctly. Always save the file as an uncompressed TIFF or a high-resolution PNG, so those tiny grain particles don't get crushed during compression. Start collecting your own reference materials now. Scan old notebooks, download vintage maps, and stockpile public domain typography to build a dedicated asset library. By mastering these atmospheric techniques, you gain the ability to inject history, tension, and emotional weight into any narrative without ever leaving your iPad.